India just used Africa to outsmart the United States. And in this video, I'm going to explain how they've done this and highlight how this is a perfect example of the opportunity that Africa has in the global stage to not only improve its influence and its power, but for that to translate to a better standard of living for the majority of people on the continent. Thank you so much for clicking on this video today. If you don't know me, my name is TJ. I'm Nigerian and British mixed. And on this channel, we talk about African geopolitics. So in the media of late, there's been a lot of pressure given from the United States towards India for how they're handling their relationship with Russia as it pertains to the purchasing of energy, and in particular, oil.
The West seems to be quite vociferous in trying to curtail funding for the war in Ukraine, whereas by purchasing this oil for national interest, India is being asked, are you funding this war?
So, look, I mean, I don't want to sound argumentative, but then tell me buying Russian gas is not funding the war? I mean, why is it's only Indian money and oil coming to India which funds, but it's not gas coming to Europe which funds? I mean, look, somewhere, I mean, let's be a little even-handed out here. Why if countries in Europe and the West and the United States are so concerned, why don't they allow Iranian oil to come into the market? Why don't they allow Venezuelan oil to come into the market? I mean, they've squeezed every other source of oil we have, and then say, okay, guys, you must not go into the market and get the best deal for your people. I don't think that's a very fair approach.
This issue is filled with so much arrogance, so much hypocrisy, as well as unveiling the fact that the United States just is not the superpower it used to be. And this week, India did something to demonstrate this. So let's have a look at exactly what's just happened. India rejects US crude oil for Nigerian oil as sanctions on Russia reshape supply. Indian Oil Corporation, IOC, India's state-owned refining power, in the past few weeks modified its crude oil procurement strategy, avoiding barrels from the United States in favor of West African and Middle Eastern crude. On Friday, trade sources revealed the IOC purchased 2 million barrels of West African crude oil and 1 million barrels of Middle Eastern grade, maintaining a pattern that reflects both geopolitical concerns and India's realistic energy security goals. There is so much about this story that I wanted to carefully unpack to show Africa's advantage that I had to write everything down, and I'm going to read out my notes to you right now. India's decision to reject American oil and turn to Africa is not just a trade move. It's a statement about sovereignty, multipolarity, and the decline of Western dominance. The United States has been putting enormous pressure on India to cut ties with Russia in the energy sector. Washington argues that buying Russian oil funds the war in Ukraine, a war they described as an unjustified invasion. But the framing hides the truth. Russia's actions in Ukraine cannot be separated from the events of 2014, when the United States backed a regime change in Kiev after President Yanukovych refused to align with the West. A leaked phone call between senior US officials openly discussing who should replace him made clear what really happened. Added to this is NATO's long record of breaking promises about expansion eastward, moving closer and closer to Russian borders. These provocations are at the heart of the conflict. For India, which has no part in this war, to be punished for buying cheaper Russian oil shows the arrogance of Washington. India, like many nations, saw an opportunity when Russian oil became discounted after 2022. It bought heavily to protect its economy and shield itself from global price shocks. But as part of a wider campaign to weaken Moscow, the US government recently pushed India to stop these purchases. At the same time, America slapped a 50% tariff on Indian exports, a move that had nothing to do with fairness and everything to do with punishing India for standing with BRICS. It is economic warfare dressed up as diplomacy. The irony is obvious. The European Union, which is directly involved in the conflict with Russia, continues to buy Russian gas and has done throughout the war. Washington says nothing about this. But when India, thousands of miles away, chooses Russian oil to serve its own needs, it is condemned and pressured. It is a double standard Africa knows all too well. For decades, Western powers forced rules on Africa they never followed themselves. In this latest clash, India has outsmarted America. Instead of bowing to the pressure, it turned to Africa. Nigeria and Angola have become key suppliers, with Indian refineries purchasing millions of barrels of their crude oil. By doing so, India avoided expensive American oil, reduced its exposure to tariffs, and secured energy supplies from partners that come without political strings. Africa has become the escape route that allowed India to sidestep Washington's trap. This is a major shift. For years, Africa has been seen as dependent on the rest of the world, particularly through programs like USAID. But today, the world is increasingly dependent on Africa. India's population is growing fast, its economy is expanding, and its demand for energy is massive. By choosing African oil, India is signaling that Africa is not just a backup option, but a central part of its long-term strategy. From a Pan-African perspective, this moment is significant. Africa's resources are finally being recognized as indispensable, not optional. The question is whether African nations will use this leverage wisely or once again allow themselves to be trapped in an old colonial pattern of exporting raw materials cheaply while importing finished goods at high costs. Right now, the trade is crude oil. That means the real value lies elsewhere, in the refining and petrochemical industries outside of Africa. To truly benefit, African nations must move up the chain. They must refine their own oil, produce their own diesel, petrol, and jet fuel, and sell those products directly to global markets. If they fail to do this, history will repeat itself. What makes the shift even more important is the global context. The United States is no longer the singular dominant economic power. The rise of BRICS, the emergence of Asia, and the growing importance of African resources all point to a multipolar world. Washington's ability to dictate terms is weakening. It tried to corner India by blocking Russia and push American oil. Instead, India found an alternative in Africa. This shows the limits of the US power and the opportunities open to nations willing to chart their own course. For Africa, the lesson is clear. If India can resist pressure, so can African states. Too often, when faced with Western threats of sanctions or aid cuts, African leaders fold. But this case shows there are always alternatives. Nigeria and Angola have much to gain from this new demand. With Indian refineries buying millions of barrels, their export revenue can go up and stabilize at a time when competition for markets is fierce. But the real potential is collective. If African nations act individually, it will compete against each other and accept lower prices, a race to the bottom. If they act together, they can negotiate from a position of strength. Imagine a Pan-African oil strategy where buyers like India are not only purchasing crude oil, but also required to invest in African infrastructure, refineries, and technology transfer. This would turn the current short-term gain into a long-term development. The history of colonialism was built on controlling Africa's trade routes and resources. Neocolonialism continues that control through tariffs, sanctions, and financial pressure. But India's pivot to Africa exposes how hollow these tactics have been. America could not stop India from buying oil. It could not force India to pay more for US barrels. Instead, India chose a path that strengthened Africa's role in the global economy. This is not just about crude oil, it's about sovereignty. Sovereignty means choosing partners freely, trading without concern, and refusing to let outside powers dictate national policy. Africa has been denied this for generations. Today, with the world changing, sovereignty is once again within reach. And it shows that when the world shifts, Africa has a chance to rise. If it chooses sovereignty over dependency, Pan-Africanism over division, and value creation over raw exports. Africa now stands at a crossroads. It can remain the world's raw mineral pit, or it can transform into a sovereign bloc that no one can ignore. India's move has shown the world just how powerful African oil is. The next move must come from Africa itself. I would love to know what you guys think in the comments section. Please let me know your thoughts. If you have nothing to say, would it be too much for you to write the words African sovereignty in the comments section? It just lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you like what I'm doing, and you want me to continue. Thank you so much for watching this video today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.